What that entire 6-year experience taught me was that one man can make a difference. And that's it. If you stick by your guns, that literally, you're not registering the firearm, you're registering the tax by the serial number of the firearm to ensure that the tax had been paid on that particular firearm. So if there's no tax anymore, what is the registry? We probably saved our nation somewhere in the $300 to $400 billion of expenses.
Welcome to another episode of the Mind Your Own Business podcast. I'm attorney Jerry Parisi, and with me today is a very special guest, Representative Andrew Clyde, Congressman from Georgia's 9th District. Welcome, Congressman.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and you're running again.
I am.
And the election the primary is coming up shortly. I think
correct.
Early voting starts soon in April. I don't know when this episode is going to come out. And then the election day is in May. Is that correct?
May 19th.
May 19th.
Yeah, Tuesday, May 19th.
Please get out and vote. Please get informed, get out and vote. And this is an opportunity to, explain, what you've been doing up in Washington the past few terms. Mm-hmm. And then just talk about whatever you think is important that the voters in the 9th District want to hear about. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I'd like to ask you is, I think some people know your story, and I know a little bit about why you got involved in Congress, why you chose to run. But can you tell us exactly why you chose to get involved?
Sure. Jerry, I started out my adult career as a Navy officer, spent 11 years active duty, and then...
Thank you for your service.
Well, it's an honor to serve. Spent 17 years in the Reserve. And while I was on active duty, I started a hobby, just as I love guns. I love our Second Amendment. And when I transitioned to the Reserves, I went to the University of Georgia, got my master's degree in business, and took that hobby and built a business plan for it, and decided, instead of going and working for the corporate world, I'll just go and, I'll take this business and see what I can do with it. So when I graduated Georgia in 1999, I got a little place and started Clyde Armory. That's a federal farms licensee, and started doing law enforcement sales, basically. Grew that business until we got our own location in 2010, all right, from a rented location, and went through, during that time frame, went through 3 combat deployments in Iraq and Kuwait as part of my naval service. I was a Navy CB, construction battalion. In 2013, after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, and Barack Obama, who was president at the time, he said, he's going to ban black rifles, and he was going to use his pen and his phone, and he was going to get rid of those, and that caused a stir in the market. And so most federal farms licensees, most gun stores, sold most of their inventory, and that's basically what we did at the time. And we had the Internal Revenue Service come in and literally seized $940,313 from my business.
Jeez.
Yeah, just took it straight out of the bank account, just seized it. They did it through what's called civil asset forfeiture, which I think is totally unconstitutional. You can't just go and take someone's assets, all right, without charging them and, in my opinion, convicting them of a crime, all right? None of that, but I wasn't charged with anything, certainly wasn't convicted of anything. So I fought back and I met with them, with my attorney and my accountant, and we sat down and said, hey, all this is legally earned, and what's the problem? So they audited me for 4 years, both personal and business.
Well, let me stop you there, if you don't mind. When you said, what's the problem, what was their explanation?
Their explanation was that I deposited my money in the bank in the wrong way, okay? And I'm like, how can you do that? They accused me of what's called structuring your bank deposits, okay?
Okay.
And I had no idea what that even was. So how can I do something and I don't know what it is?
Is that to come in under a certain threshold, maybe a $10,000 threshold to avoid reporting requirements?
It's the $10,000 threshold.
Okay.
But I had an insurance policy that said, hey, if you take more than $10,000 in cash out of your business, we're not going to insure it. And that's pretty much a standard policy, small business policy across the board. So why would you ever do that? So consistently we would deposit $10,000 or less, And so they accused me of quote, structuring my bank deposits. And I'm like, it's legally earned money. What's the problem? That's why we do a tax return every year. Well, they came back after the audits and they said, yeah, we agree it's legally earned and it's properly reported. Great, fantastic, give it back. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that ahead of a trial. They were going to take me to trial.
What was the charge? Or
there was no charge. There was no charge. No, this was a civil trial. Okay. A civil trial, and it wasn't against me. It was against the money. All right, which is interesting. It was against. It was the United States against $940,000. Okay, which I found very puzzling. Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess because it's not against me, if it was against me, I could have character references and that sort of thing. But because it's against the money has no character, so you can't bring character references or anything like that into a trial.
Wow.
But it was very interesting, and I think you would appreciate this, Jerry. We had that was April 12th, 2013, and we had a hearing on July 22nd, I think, 2013. It was very unusual, actually, to get a hearing before a trial, okay? But we did. My attorney actually got a hearing with the judge, Judge Clay Land, on the federal side, federal court. And he asked the prosecutor, he said, so has Mr. Clyde done anything wrong, anything other than what you call simple structuring? And he said, no, nothing. And he said, so when are you going to give him back his money? And the United States attorney said, well, we're not going to, not ahead of a trial. And here we had sold basically all the inventory in the business. They had taken all the cash. So we literally had nothing. I had nothing to bring new inventory in. I had nothing to put inventory on the shelf, nothing to sell. So basically the IRS was strangling me, and so the judge looked at my attorney and he said, well, ahead of trial, okay? He said, if I order you to return his money, you'll simply appeal my order and this will be, caught up in the court system for a long time.
Yeah, drag it out.
And it basically, starved me to death. So he looked at my attorney and he said, Mr. Daniel, he said, when would you be ready for trial? And Mr. Daniel, being a very smart attorney, he said, oh, I'm ready right now, Your Honor. And
best answer.
Best answer, exactly. And he looked over at the United States attorney and he said, oh, we wouldn't be ready for 3 or 4 months. We've got this case and that case, and we've got all this,
sure,
to do, basically delay. And the judge said, well, he said, I'm here right now. I've got a court case begin. This was a Monday evening, by the way. Okay. He said, I've got a court case beginning tomorrow. I already have a jury selected for it. He said, well, if it's not going to be before trial, then trial in 9 days. 9 days. And the United States attorney about flipped out. And he goes, but Your Honor, he said, we could never be ready for that. He said, what do you mean? He said, you've already taken his money, so you obviously have all the evidence you need.
Right.
So trial in 9 days. All right. And he said, unless, of course, you want to give him back a substantial portion of his money, so at least he can put inventory back on the shelf, because we're going into the hunting season here and then to the Christmas season. If they would delay, they would literally eliminate my business. And that was their intent,
Yeah.
I need to mention, they had come back to me and said, hey, we will give you $600,000 back if you will forfeit $325,000 to us. Okay, so the IRS wanted me to forfeit $325,000 to them when I had done nothing wrong.
Right.
So this, to me, was all about the money. They just wanted money, and they looked at me as low-hanging fruit. And I'm like, no, I've done nothing wrong. I'm not going to give you a solitary dime. So anyway, the judge used his calendar, all right, that cannot be appealed. And I'd never even heard or seen of that before. But you can't appeal a judge's calendar. If he says something on a specific date, you can ask.
Yeah.
Okay. But if he sets something on a certain date, as I understand it, that's the date it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So the United States attorney could not appeal the judge's calendar. So if he said trial in 9 days, there was going to be a trial in 9 days, And he said, unless you give Mr. Clyde back a substantial portion of his money. And they gave us back $440,000, literally almost instantly.
So about half.
About half of it. So at least it gave us something to put product on the shelf.
Sure.
And then he said, and even then, he said, trial in 30 days. All right. He put the screws to the United States attorney because in his opinion, what they were doing was a violation of the Constitution. It went all the way up to the day before or a couple of days before, quote, the trial, all right? And the United States attorney literally folded and said, just, throw something at us. And my attorney said it would cost you $50,000 to go to trial. He said, so if you get that or anything less, and then he said, that's a win for you, a huge win. And so I told him, I said, I'm not going to do that unless I go to the United States Congress, to my government, and tell them what the IRS has done to me. All right. And so we settled. I got the additional $450,000 back. I got the $440 and then the $450 back. And that was in September of 2013, October the 3rd of 2013. I was sitting in Washington, D.C. in front of the Oversight Subcommittee of House Ways and Means. That's the committee that has oversight over the IRS. Okay. And they were listening. They heard my story and they said, we've never heard anything like this before. This is amazing. I said, well, why don't you look into it? Because I'm sure I'm not the only one that has suffered this kind of IRS abuse. The more they looked into it, the more they found that during the Obama administration from 2009 to 2013, over 700 individuals and small businesses had been attacked by the IRS through and had their assets seized through civil asset forfeiture, over $26 million worth.
Jeez.
All right. It was insane. So they called me up 16 months later in February of 2015 and said, will you come in and will you testify against the IRS? We've got the IRS commissioner, the top guy in the IRS. We've got him coming in for for testimony in front of our subcommittee. I said, absolutely, I will come and I will testify. Well, there were three of us. There was a candy distributor, a dairy farmer, and a gun store owner. What a cross-section of America, all right, to testify against the IRS. And every solitary one of them had the same experience of civil asset forfeiture. There was supposed to be a fourth. There was actually a Mexican restaurant owner, but they had taken $35,000, I think, from her, and they had completely bankrupted her, and she was unable to come because she had no business anymore. She had nothing. They had taken everything that she had, and she folded. And that was one of the consequences of what the IRS had done. So anyway, during the hearing and all of the testimony, the chairman, Peter Roskam, a congressman from Illinois, he asked the IRS commissioner, he said, now that you've heard all these witnesses and all their testimony, he said, is there any reason, do you agree that they have suffered tremendous abuse from the IRS? And he said, yes. He said, I agree, they have. He said, so is there any reason why you shouldn't, on behalf of the IRS, apologize to them? And so literally, I got an apology from the IRS commissioner for the abuse that I suffered as a regular citizen, all right? And so I told the IRS commissioner at the time, I said, well, thank you for the apology, but make it right, okay? It cost me $152,000 to fight them in court, okay? And literally to get the money back that I got. The IRS wasn't going to make that right.
Right.
And so they crafted a piece of legislation. And what that legislation does, I got to assist in drafting that legislation as a private citizen. And they called it the RESPECT Act, Restraining Excessive Seizure of Property Through the Exploitation of Civil Asset Forfeiture Tools Act. That's what it stood for. And it passed that was the 114th Congress at the time. It passed the House and the 114th and the 115th Congress unanimously. Didn't get a vote in the Senate in either of those Congresses, but the 116th Congress, it passed again and finally got a vote in the Senate in the 116th Congress, courtesy of Senator Grassley and Chuck Grassley. And President Trump signed that bill into law. But before he did that, the chairman, Peter Roskam, called me up and said, hey, he said, we would like to name this bill after you, if you don't mind. And I said, can you do that? I said, I would be honored. But he said, we're the United States Congress. We can name legislation anything we want. And so they named it after the three witnesses. So it's called the Clyde Hirsch Sowers Respect Act. President Trump signed that bill into law July 1st of 2019, and it took away the authority of the IRS to ever confiscate legally earned money through civil asset forfeiture ever again. And so I'm the only, I wasn't a member of Congress at the time, but that is what led me to run for Congress when the seat in the 9th District became open literally a few months later, about early 2020, when Doug Collins, the former member, ran for Senate. The seat became open, and so I ran for that seat. What that entire 6-year experience taught me was that one man can make a difference, and that's it. If you stick by your guns, literally.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. But stand for what is right. Okay, then you can win. All right, and we won. They took my money, we took it back. And then we went and took their authority to take my money and anybody else's money too. Okay, so they don't have that authority anymore, and it's in law. So I'm the only sitting member of Congress right now that has a federal law named after him. All right, and
awesome.
And it's a law that takes away the authority of the IRS.
Well, thank you for that.
Well, it's called fighting for what you believe in and being successful. And that's what the people of the 9th District saw when I ran in 2020. I ran against a prior member of Congress. I ran against a sitting Georgia senator. I ran against 2 sitting members of the Georgia House. Okay, at the time, there were 9 of us in the primary, and I came out number 2, came in second. But we have a majority plus 1 rule in Georgia, and so we went to a runoff, and I won the runoff then by 13 points. So, and that's what the people of the 9th District see in me is I will fight to ensure that their rights are protected. And I promised them at the time that I would fight to not only protect and defend the Second Amendment, but to restore it, right? And that's why in the One Big Beautiful Bill, you saw the restoration. A piece of the One Big Beautiful Bill was the restoration of the Second Amendment rights when it came to restricted firearms, National Firearms Act firearms, and in removing the taxation in those firearms. Because in my studying of the entire Second Amendment and the taxation, which I think is a massive unconstitutional act against a constitutional right.
Yes.
Chief Justice John Marshall of our Supreme Court said in 1819, the power to tax includes the power to destroy. If you can tax something legitimately, you can destroy it.
Yep.
You can raise the tax so high that no one can afford the tax, and therefore they cannot afford the right. Well, our constitutional rights, our Bill of Rights, our unalienable rights, they cannot be taken away from us. So how can you tax them? You can't. Constitutionally, you cannot tax a constitutional right. If you could, then you could eliminate it by simply raising the tax, and then no one would be able to afford the right. So that's why we did that in the One Big Beautiful Bill, and I was the point of the spear on that, and I'm very, very, very proud of that accomplishment. It saves American citizens who love our Second Amendment and want to exercise their Second Amendment. It saves them about $140 million every year in taxes that they no longer have to pay. So,
and what you removed was that tax on suppressors, or some people call them silencers, correct?
Yep, suppressors and short-barrel rifles, short-barrel shotguns, short-barrel firearms and suppressors both.
They still need to be registered under the NFA.
They still have to be registered, and that's a point of contention right now.
Yeah.
Because when you look back at why Congress was able to register them, it was through the power of their ability to tax, okay? And that's what the Supreme Court said back in 1937, I think it was. It was the power to tax, because in reality, you're not registering the firearm, you're registering the tax by the serial number of the firearm to ensure that the tax had been paid on that particular firearm. So if there's no tax anymore, what is the registry? It's not a registry of tax, okay? Now you're actually registering the firearm. Well, they don't have the right to register the firearm, okay? The registry was a registry of the tax paid. So, our Department of Justice is, well, anyway, it's interesting. Our Attorney General got removed today. So
I saw that.
Pam Bondi did.
Yeah. So before we get to that, let me ask you a quick question on what has been a criticism lobbied against you is that you held up the passing of the One Big Beautiful Bill in order to get that suppressor tax removed. Can you just explain the circumstances around that and respond to that criticism?
Sure, absolutely. That's absolutely false, number one. It was already in the bill, okay? I got it put in the bill before it even went to the Senate. The Senate actually, improved it, okay? And they added the short barrel aspect of it.
Nice.
Because I asked them to, okay? And I lobbied a number of senators very hard to make that happen. No, it was some ancillary things that have been very, very big wins for us. One of them was a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We are $39 trillion in debt in this country. The amount of money we spend in just servicing the interest is
about $1 trillion.
Is over $1 trillion, right? It's more than we spend on the entire Department of Defense every year. It is ridiculous. It is completely unsustainable. We have not had a vote on a balanced budget amendment in Congress in almost a decade. So we wanted to make sure in fact, we should be voting on a balanced budget amendment every solitary year.
Yeah.
Okay, in my opinion. I promised the people of Georgia that I would take Georgia values to Washington, D.C. Well, Georgia in its constitution requires a balanced budget for every municipality, for the state, every government agency has to have a balanced budget. That's a phenomenal, value for Georgians. And so I want that value for Washington, D.C. as well. But the federal government doesn't have a requirement to be balanced in its budget. It needs to. Because Georgia does. Georgia has a $15 billion with a B, $1 billion surplus. Now the federal government has a $39 trillion with a T, or $1 trillion debt. Yeah. All right. So we need to make the federal government more fiscally responsible. Part of that, in my opinion, is a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. And that was one of the agreements that we got. All right. In that, what was it? Maybe a 4-hour delay. Okay. in the voting on the One Big Beautiful Bill, we also got some Green New Deal subsidies eliminated. Okay. As part of that as well. We probably saved our nation somewhere in the $300 to $400 billion of expenses every solitary year because of our negotiations. Sometimes they say you want to look at the sausage, but you don't want to see how it's made. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of the way politics is. You have to use leverage to ensure that you get the best outcome. And I think we got the best outcome with the One Big Beautiful Bill, and I proudly supported it all the way.
So you mentioned the $39 trillion federal debt. Do you think there is any way to reverse course on such an astronomical number? Because in my personal opinion, I think it's one of the biggest threats to our country and our way of life.
I believe that it is the biggest threat, the biggest internal threat to our country is the national debt beyond any other threat. I think the greatest external threat is probably China. Okay, Iran was a definite external threat, but not the biggest. Iran wanted to use nuclear weapons against us. Well, that's kind of over with now. I think the president has done a phenomenal job in that, but in protecting our country in that regard. But I think the greatest internal threat is our national debt because it is truly unsustainable. Can we get there to a balanced budget? I believe we can. It took us about 40 years to get here, okay, to this astronomical amount. It's not going to be something that's going to happen in just a few years. We've got to literally, what I call bend the curve down and start making our deficit smaller and smaller and smaller every year until we get to the point of a balanced budget. And we're going to have to do that in two ways. We're going to have to grow our economy, because every time we have a 1% increase in gross domestic product, GDP, that equates to $3.3 trillion, okay, over what's called the 10-year budget cycle, so $330 billion a year of additional revenue that comes into the federal government simply by the economy growing. That's it, So you have that aspect of it. And then we need to cut out waste, fraud, and abuse in our federal government. In between those two things, I think we can bend the curve to probably over maybe a decade. I would hope we could do it over a decade, get us to that point where we can get to a balanced budget. Our current federal path is unsustainable. And what I do not ever want to see is what's called a sovereign debt crisis. And that
sovereign debt crisis. Could you explain that?
Sovereign debt crisis, sure. A sovereign debt crisis will occur in our country when the United States Treasury will no longer be able to have a Treasury auction, and people will not want to buy the Treasury bonds. Because, every year the Treasury has multiple Treasury auctions. We don't just borrow like $1.5 trillion additional every year, which is the deficit from what we bring in revenue to what we spend. There are Treasury bonds that are maturing every year. So we have those maturing bonds have to be paid for.
They're constantly being paid off.
Constantly being paid off, right. And so we're actually borrowing probably $5 or $6 trillion. We're sending out $5 or $6 trillion of Treasury bonds every year, and we're paying off some of the maturing ones that are coming in. The problem is the maturing bonds are generally at a much lower percentage rate, like 1.5%, 2% from 10, 15, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. But now with what happened during the Biden administration, we had inflation, hit 9%. I think the highest the Treasury yield was like 5.1. So now we're going from a 1% bond to a 5% bond. That's 5 times the amount of interest now that we're going to have to pay, which is why you're seeing the interest skyrocket and go literally up to $1 trillion every year. So it's a serious problem. But if the Treasury ever has an auction of Treasury bonds, and the stock market or the bond market doesn't want to buy those because either they have too much debt in their portfolio already, or they don't believe that the United States will actually pay the interest on the debt. If they ever believe that,
we'll have a crisis.
We will have a crisis. And you see us moving toward that when you see the bond rating going down. 3 times now we've had a decrease in our bond rating. All right. And that's a problem. It's a huge problem. And if we ever have a point where the Secretary of Treasury is unable to sell treasuries, then that is a sovereign debt crisis, and we will not be able to borrow money to pay our debts. And that's we will see something way worse than 1929.
So you're a staunch fiscal conservative.
Absolutely.
Do I have that correct?
Yeah, so you can call me a staunch fiscal hawk.
Okay. One of the other criticisms that's been lobbied against you is your reluctance to earmark anything for the district. Mm-hmm. How do you balance a principled economic viewpoint mm-hmm. with what's best for the district and bringing funds or bringing federal money into the district? How do you make that determination? How do you balance that? What is your guiding principles there?
Well, you're right. I am a very staunch fiscal hawk. I prefer the money to stay in the district than to go to Washington, D.C. All right. And we've done that through the One Big Beautiful Bill in extending the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act tax cuts, literally, by having no tax on tips, by having no tax on overtime, by increasing the Social Security tax or the Social Security deduction by $6,000 per person, $12,000 per couple, literally making it so that 88% of all senior citizens who get Social Security will pay no tax whatsoever. I prefer that tax money to stay in the district. I don't want I don't want that money to go to Washington, D.C., number one. Number two, when you look at all of the projects that are funded by earmarks, the vast majority of them, we're talking 95%, are not federal authorities to begin with. It's not money that the federal government is truly allowed to spend. I've seen community centers, all right, funded by federal dollars. It's like
Leering centers?
Leering centers. There you go. Exactly. Leering centers. When you look at it, the federal government, unlike the state government, is constrained by Article 1. There are 18 enumerated authorities within Article 1. The Department of Education is not a federal authority at all. That is an unconstitutional department. We should not be spending money at the federal level on education. That's something that's local and state. The 10th Amendment is very clear. Anything that the federal government is not specifically allowed to do, or the state is specifically prohibited from doing, is reserved unto the state and to the people. All right?
But it's a lot easier to indoctrinate school kids if you have a federal Department of Education, correct?
It is a lot easier to indoctrinate, and but I'm not for indoctrination.
Like
it's a money thing that I tell folks that Congress has an addiction to opium, all right? And that's OPM, other people's money.
Yes.
And when you have an earmark, regardless of the earmark, then you're always going to vote for everybody else's earmarks too. And that's why you have seen a tremendous increase in federal spending, because everybody votes for everybody else's spending. So spending just constantly increases. You can't have that and be fiscally responsible. That's not what our state does. And that's not what our federal government should be doing. Our federal government is constrained in its ability to spend money through the Constitution. Our founding fathers were very wise men. They did not want an all-powerful federal government that could spend money on everything and anything, all right? I think the phrase is, if the federal government can give you everything that you want, it can also take everything that you have.
Yeah.
And that's not, and that's why the federal government should be constrained. And it needs to be constrained.
Agreed. I think some of the founding fathers may disagree. Alexander Hamilton maybe in particular, but that's neither here nor there.
I think the vast majority were very, very concerned about an overreaching federal government, and I'm very concerned about an overreaching federal government. I went to Congress to reduce the size, scope, and cost of the federal government. That's what I promised the folks of the district, and that's exactly what we are doing. We did that in the One Big Beautiful Bill, had the largest spending cut in the history of our country, $1.6 trillion over a 10-year budget cycle of spending cuts had never happened before, all right? And that's what we need to do. And there's more that can be cut from the federal budget. We don't need to be spending more money. We need it. Number one, it needs to, like what we did in the One Big Beautiful Bill, it needs to stay in the district, okay? And then we make sure that stupid things don't happen, like the renaming of Lake Lanier, all right?
I've read in the news that you're very passionate about this, and I hadn't heard about it before. So can you explain what's going on with Lake Lanier?
Sure. Before I got to Congress, a bill was passed in the National Defense Authorization Act that required the renaming of every federal entity that was named after any sort of a member or person involved in the Confederacy, okay? And Sidney Lanier was a conscripted private who served in the Confederate Army for, 3 or 4 months, all right? Well,
so long time.
Yeah, very, very long time, and he was obviously quite influential. As I understand, he was captured and became a prisoner of war. All right, but after the war was over, he went and he became a literary professor at Johns Hopkins University. All right, amazing man. Wrote the Song of the Chattahoochee about North Georgia. All right. He was recognized in 1972 by our country as an incredible professor of literature and musician as well. He was a flautist. He was the principal flautist in the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. All right. But he was recognized with a postage stamp. His name is on a postage stamp from 1972. So we only put people's likenesses on postage stamps that are honorable people, that our whole country honors.
Sure.
And so in the 1950s, Congress named this lake, a newly created lake by the Army Corps of Engineers, after Sidney Lanier. Amazing person. And this particular piece of legislation in 2020 required the name, because he served in the Confederate Army, that the lake be renamed. And I'm like, absolutely not. This is not going to happen. There are over 250 businesses in Hall County and the surrounding counties that have Lanier in their names. Everything from the Lanier Federal Credit Union to First Care of Lanier to multiple subdivisions that have Lanier, Lake Lanier Islands, et cetera, Lake Lanier Parkway. real estate agencies with Lanier in their names, all the way down to the Boys and Girls Club of Lanier, okay? All of these entities would be forced to rebrand, costing millions upon millions of dollars in expense to the community. Even the Army Corps itself said it would cost them $1 million to rename, just to change the signs and all the other infrastructure that would be necessary to rename Lake Lanier. $1 million of taxpayer money wasted, costing the community millions upon millions of dollars. And there are some businesses that probably wouldn't survive. So I stopped it. I told the district about it. I informed the district about it. And for 3 years in the appropriations process, we put what was called a limitation amendment in the appropriations, in the appropriation that funded the Army Corps of Engineers, that limited them from ever spending a dime, from spending any money at all on the renaming process. And finally, in this last appropriation that the president signed into law on January 30th, it was included in that appropriation, signed into law, and the Army Corps of Engineers now is prohibited from renaming Lake Lanier or Buford Dam, caught up in the same issue. But and so that saved the community, and many folks don't know about that, okay? But it saved the community a tremendous amount of expense. But that's one of the reasons that you have a congressman, to fight for your community, not just to fight, but to win. Yeah. And I plan on winning.
Nice. Along the lines of winning, you mentioned the Iran war a little bit ago. I think President Trump ran, part of the platform was no new wars. Right. We saw some limited action last summer that was supposed to target Iran's nuclear facilities with a B-2 stealth bomber.
Correct.
And we were told that those nuclear capabilities had been eliminated in that operation. Then we see, this year, a couple months ago, a larger scale attack on Iran. A lot of conservatives, I think, that I've talked to have been disappointed in what we're seeing. What are your thoughts on the war or the Operation Epic Fury that's going on right now?
Well, I'll tell you, as a 3 deployment combat veteran, what we have to do is ensure that the threats to our homeland are dealt with overseas and never allowed to actually come into our homeland. Unlike what happened on 9/11, we can never allow anything like that to happen again. I think what we saw is that, yes, we buried all of the centrifuges, all right, under probably 100 to 200 feet of rock through Operation Midnight Hammer, all right? But what we saw was the Iranians were trying to go back and get what they had lost and dig it out, all right? So, and this is the other thing. Those are the centrifuges that actually take uranium from like 2 or 3% enrichment to 60% enrichment. If you go from 60% to 90%, which is actually weapons grade, all right, it takes about 2 weeks. Iran was to the point, literally, of taking some of that 60% uranium and taking it to 90%. Now, they didn't necessarily have the delivery capability to send that, to build the bomb and send it by rocket or by ballistic missile. Okay, now they could reach some of the outlying portions of the United States like Guam, et cetera, or potentially Hawaii. The way they could get it here that many people don't think about is container ship. Think about that. They had enough nuclear material, over 1,000 pounds of it, to build 11 nuclear weapons. They could send them by container ship to the United States, send them into the port, send them in under the Golden Gate Bridge to San Francisco, to San Diego, to Los Angeles, to Oakland, to Seattle, and detonate those things in our ports. We would have lost hundreds of thousands of people. The president would never allow that to happen. He would never allow them to get that nuclear weapon that they were so bound and determined to get. Time after time you saw protests in Iran, death to America, death to America, death to America. They were serious about that. They're absolutely dead serious about that. And we have to be just as serious. And so what they were planning on doing was, with all the missiles that they were creating, they wanted to make a shield to protect their nuclear program. Literally create so many intermediate and long-range ballistic missiles that they could overwhelm our anti-missile systems. And they were literally building them by the hundreds every month. And if you get to that certain point where the number that you have will overwhelm anything, that becomes then a shield for them to finish their nuclear program. So the president literally had to act, and I'm glad he did. We have a safer country because of it. We're now 32 days into the operation. I think last night, if you had the opportunity to listen to the president, and he talked about all the other wars, World War I, almost 2 years, World War II, almost 4 years, the Korean War, like 3.5 years, et cetera. We're at 32 days. I don't think we'll probably hit 60 days before we finish the job and we're out of there.
Think so?
I think so. I think the president's going to be pretty accurate. We're basically running out of things to hit. I mean, we've hit over 12,000 targets, but the point is to eliminate their ability to strike us. And I think that he's going to be successful, very successful, when the operation is totally done.
A lot of noise is being made that Israel pulled us into this war, that Prime Minister Netanyahu has some undue influence on President Trump, maybe. Do you have any thoughts around what Israel's doing, or if any of that is true?
Israel is our greatest partner in the Middle East, all right? They're literally the only democracy in the Middle East. But I'll tell you this, nobody pulls President Trump anywhere. If President Trump wants to do something, he'll do it. There's no world leader that will either force President Trump to do anything or coerce or leverage President Trump to do anything. Not at all. Now, I will tell you one thing. The Israelis are incredible in their capabilities, and the fact that they're the ones that took out the senior Iranian leadership, okay, the Ayatollahs, all right, I think was amazing. And a lot of what we did paved the way for them to do that, I believe, in taking out all of the anti-aircraft abilities of the Iranians. And we did that literally in the first couple of days. So I think we have worked well together, and we need to continue working well with our partners that are democratic countries. Now, many of the countries of the Middle East are not. We still work well with them too, but I think those that at least have democracies are by far our best allies.
I want to ask you a question about lobbyists. And in particular, there's a lot of noise along the same lines that we're going around AIPAC. And that AIPAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee, if I got that right, has influence over a lot of people in Congress, the Senate, the House of Representatives. What are your thoughts on AIPAC and whether lobbyists in general should have as much influence as they do?
Well, there is a place for lobbyists, and that is to help educate members. Sometimes lobbyists are more expert in specific fields, okay? They can help put us in touch with those people who have better knowledge about specific areas. But when it comes to actually influencing, a vote or something like that, no, not so much. No,
you don't think it happens so much?
I don't. Well, it doesn't happen to me. That's for sure. I don't know that I should speak for other folks. Okay?
Well, let me ask you this, because you're on the inside.
Me, that there's, I'm going to look at it and go, is this the right thing to do or isn't it? If there's some knowledge I don't have that I need, that's one thing. All right, but no lobbyist is going to influence me one way or the other.
Do they try?
Something. Oh, I'm sure they try. Okay. But, on the funding side, I get almost no PAC money from Washington, D.C. I guess that means that they think I can't be influenced.
Fair enough.
So, it's one of those things that I have a moral compass. I have a compass that has set values. And I stick to those values. What
is your North Star? What do you keep? What do you think about whenever a tough vote comes up or a tough issue? What do you point to?
I've been a Christian for many, many years, and the Bible has many instructions as to how you should live your life, and I hold to that. Number one, I ask folks constantly across the district, and they say, hey, what can we do for me? And I tell them, pray for me. I want wisdom. I want discernment. I want courage. And I want the ability to articulate it. That's it right there. And so pray for me for that. If you pray for that, the Lord will give it to me. And I'll be able to communicate that, what I get, the wisdom that I get. So that's really my North Star right there, if you want. But I'm a member of an amazing body of men and women in Congress called the Freedom Caucus. All right. We are the most conservative. We call ourselves the conscience of the Republican Party. Okay. We are the most conservative individuals. We're also, I think, we have the toughest spines, and we do it. We make our votes because it's the right thing to do. That's it. What's the right thing to do? And many of us are like, hey, if I lose my seat over it, that's fine. I will know I have done the right thing. That's it. We're guided by that. And we're about 30 members or so. And DC can be a very dark place.
You don't say.
You don't say, yeah. And we encourage each other. And we meet every fly-in. We talk about legislation. We talk about strategy, all right, to ensure that the right outcome is what happens. And so it's very much a brotherhood or sisterhood, okay, of like-minded folks that put country above everything else, and that's it.
What are your thoughts on term limits? There's a lot being made in the media about aging congressmen and women. I think a lot of us don't like it, what we see. Do you support term limits?
Well, it depends how you define term limits, all right? There's an entity out there, I think it's called U.S. Term Limits, that wants to limit members of the House to 6 years and members of the Senate to 12 years. And I look at that and I say, that's not logical to me, because here you have the Senate, all right? And here, the biggest problem in Congress is the Senate, okay, number one. If we could get the Save America Act passed through the Senate, we'd have it'd be a whole lot better. But a senator is worth about 4.5 members of Congress. All right. You've got 100 senators.
You mean as far as the voting power?
As far as the voting power, right. You've got 4.5 or 435 members of Congress, 100 members of the Senate. So every senator, carries the weight of 1%, where a member of the House carries the weight of less than 1/4%. Why would we give the Senate more time than we give the House? If you're going to balance them out, who cares how long their terms are? All right. If you're going to balance them out, then it should be 12 and 12 or 6 and 6. Okay. Or 18 and 18, whatever that particular time frame is. The other thing is this: if you truly want representative government, all right, then you're going to also have to limit staff. Because if you do not limit staff, then, let's say you go with the 6 years. So after 6 years, you have a rotating member. You will have no representation whatsoever, because you will only have staff will be running the place then. It won't be the members. Our government is so large right now that it takes a while to fully understand the way things work. And unless you also limit staff, then staff will run the government, and it will not be representatives running the government.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that before. So sort of like how the bureaucracy in the executive branch stays forever.
Exactly.
And they can just wait out the politicians.
Exactly.
They don't like what they
That's exactly right. That's why we have a problem with term limits, okay? Now, the other thing is this: in order to make term limits happen, you have to have a constitutional amendment, okay? So, and I'm fine with it. Absolutely. The only thing is the House and the Senate have to be balanced 100%, have to be even. And then you also have to deal with the staff, or the staff will simply run the place, and the membership will just churn.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's something I hadn't thought of before. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
There's another controversial topic that's been in the news: the ICE facility in Oakwood. I think it's Oakwood. Is it?
Yeah.
And I think you support that facility.
Absolutely,
is that correct?
I support that facility.
Can you tell us why? A lot of people are kind of hesitant or not necessarily on board. Can you tell us what your thoughts are on that?
Well, now, I don't understand why they're not on board with that, because all ICE is doing is enforcing the law. I think a
lot of people think not in my backyard, right? Even conservatives may think ICE is doing what they're supposed to do, but I don't necessarily want a facility in my backyard taking up resources, creating other problems that may arise.
Well, I'll tell you this. First off, If the federal government is good at one thing, it's building facilities. Okay, and I know for a fact that before ICE even considered that building, or before DHS even considered that building, that they did a complete engineering study. All right, and the folks that actually did that have all the answers as to what the water that's necessary, the electricity that's necessary, the sewer that's necessary, the food that's necessary, all of that. This isn't their first rodeo. All right, so I've got complete faith in that. We've actually been in discussions with DHS and ICE, and I'm very confident in them after those discussions. Well, before those discussions too, but especially after those discussions, I think that we'll see that DHS will be reaching out to the city of Oakwood and kind of explaining to them how this actually, this will not be a burden on them at all. In fact, if anything else, it will be a boon for them. It will be a very large positive for them. And then also we're enforcing our immigration laws. If everybody says not in my backyard, then where? Okay, you can't have that. ICE figures the best possible places, or DHS figures the best possible places to do these things, and they picked Oakwood and they picked Social Circle. So I'm 100% supportive of them. Obviously, the Democrats are not. I think there's a very nefarious reason why they want illegal migration into this country, illegal aliens.
You think that's for votes?
Oh,
or
absolutely.
Something else?
Well, it's for votes and it's for apportionment of congressional seats. All right. If you can include them in the population, then you can disenfranchise voters, actual citizens. All right.
So even if they don't vote, they could be counted as a part of the population, which would increase, the congressional seats that a state gets, stuff like that.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So these sanctuary cities that are magnets, literally, for the illegal alien population, will get more congressional seats because of it. And then with more congressional seats, they get more votes when it comes to a presidential election. So it has massive consequences across the board. I actually have a piece of legislation, and don't laugh, it's called the MAGA Act. All right, Make Apportionment Great Again. All right, which literally rearranges apportionment to be by citizenship only. If only citizens can vote for elected members of Congress or federal, elected offices, then why shouldn't it should be only citizens that determine, the count of citizens that determines how many seats go per state. That's the way it should be.
Well, Representative Clyde, that just makes too much sense. So
thank you.
That's not going to pass. I want to touch on another subject,
Okay.
Just because you, I think, are one of the most informed people on this topic. Bringing it back to the firearms. I know that Congress doesn't have anything to do with this. Is an ATF issue, but the pistol brace status and the laws are mind-blowing, and I don't know what's going on right now. Can you give a little clarity as to what is going on with the pistol brace rule?
Well, when ATF passed a rule, back in 2012, you had the pistol brace was created basically for those disabled service members. It started with disabled service members.
I didn't know that.
It did back in 2012. Folks that either had a missing arm or missing hand, and then it was expanded, obviously, to any American with a disability, where they could then have a larger pistol and be able to brace it against their arm. And it was declared not to be a short-barreled rifle. That happened in 2012. It was reaffirmed in 2015. It was overturned it was overturned in 15, was reaffirmed in 2017, and then in 2022, I think, or 2023, was overturned again. So it's flip-flopped twice, right, in ATF. And they finally created a rule which was, in my opinion, a violation of the law, in which said that if you have a brace on a pistol, it becomes an unregistered short-barreled rifle, and therefore has to be registered.
Or it's a felony.
Or a felony, right. You could get 10 years or $250,000 fine. And that was declared null and void by the courts because it violated the law that Congress had passed. I think it was the Administrative Procedures Act, all right, where you can't actually create law with a rule. You can implement law, but you can't create new law. And what they were doing was actually creating new law, all right? And so that rule was overturned. Now, and so ATF has come back and said, well, we don't even need that rule to declare pistol braces to be short-barreled rifles, all right? Well, that's a reinterpretation, okay, of something that back in 2012 they said was fine. In 2017 they said was fine, okay? And now they're reinterpreting a definition, and that's a very dangerous path to go down. If you can take words have meanings, as a lawyer, right? If you can reinterpret or redefine a definition, there's nothing you can't do if you can just redefine a definition. And so that's the problem right now. That might be one of the reasons why we don't have an attorney general. So we will see what happens now with a new attorney general. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So Pam Bondi was fired today.
Bondi was fired today.
I just seen the headlines. I don't know if
Right.
Trump has said much else besides that he's let her go. Who would you like to see replace Pam Bondi? Do you have anyone in mind?
I actually don't. I have heard a number of folks. I've heard potentially, I saw it in the news, I saw Lee Zeldin was potentially a candidate. He's been confirmed as the EPA administrator. Phenomenal man, former member of Congress, ran for governor of New York, but great conservative, very strong, very well liked by the president. And I think he would do a phenomenal job if that was the case. But then you have a deputy, I think, who's acting right now, who's also an amazing individual as well.
I thought you were going to nominate me, but maybe next time.
Don't know you well enough yet, Jerry.
Another thing that makes a lot of noise is insider trading and allegations of insider trading by Congress members.
Okay.
Do you think it happens, and what is the fix?
Well, I've never traded stock, ever, okay? Don't own any, never owned any.
And just to be clear, I wasn't accusing you.
Right. No.
I don't think there are any allegations against you. But
So I have limited experience when it comes to trading. I know insider trading is already illegal, okay? I don't know how you make it more illegal than it is right now. So it's not something I have, looked into because we don't have a bill coming to the House floor right now on it. So it would have to be something that I would research and need to look at before I think I would feel myself competent to make an opinion on.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Representative Andrew Clyde, thank you for being on the podcast today. Is there anything else that you want to tell the voters of the 9th District, or besides vote for you?
Yes, please vote for me on May 19th. Do not sit that election out. But it's an honor to serve the folks of the 9th District. It's been an honor in Congress. I think that we've been very successful and very effective in accomplishing the President's America First agenda. And I look forward to, if the voters decide that I'm the guy, to doing that for another 2 years under our amazing president, President Trump, whose endorsement I currently have.
Thank you, Congressman, for being on. This was Mind Your Own Business, and I'm Attorney Jerry Frazee. Thank you very much. And good luck in the election.
Thank you, Jerry.
So long.